Greetings, students. Today we begin our study of Buddhist philosophy. But Buddhism is a Western term. On its own terms, this way of thought we'll be studying for the rest of the semester is about as far from an ism as anything I can think of. And on its own terms, it's known as the Buddhadharma, or the way of the Buddha. And Buddha means awakened one, or the one who woke up. So Buddhism is most literally the way of the one who woke up. And it represents to me, for various reasons, one of the purest forms of philosophy I've ever encountered. And it is so unlike a religion at its core that it's almost shocking. If by religion you mean something involving belief in transcendental realities based on the authority of authors. Before we start and go any further, consider this quote, which is sort of a guiding theme for our class today, or tonight, or wherever your now finds you. This existence of ours is as transient as autumn clouds. To watch the birth and death of beings is like looking at the movements of a dance. A lifetime is like a flash of lightning in the sky, rushing by like a torrent down a deep mountain. Now, you recall that I've told you that philosophy, as I understand it, arises through questioning. You ask questions when you find yourself in the gap between how you've been told life is and how you're experiencing it. And these questions then lead you in an attempt to discover what is most real about life, about your life and everyone's life, through all that reason is and can be. So it involves the rational and what we've come to call the transrational, in order to know how to live in the light of that discovered reality. Always a metaphysics and an ethics, and an ethics and a metaphysics, in the light of reason, argument, and evidence, following the three strands of any valid knowledge quest, whether at the rational or transrational level. So the idea I'm getting at is that philosophy tries to discover reality with all that a human being, just as a human being, can bring to bear. And only that, just reason, in the richer sense of reason, in terms of pragmatic human experience. And the way of the one who woke up is at its core just that. The Buddhadharma is radically philosophical in its appeal to nothing beyond you as you are now. It appeals to nothing but the direct experience you have of yourself and how you can reason about that experience. And the accent is on reason, in the richer sense of reason I've mentioned. And his way to wake up into reality seems deceptively simple. In my own words, you need to learn to live with discipline, cultivate stillness, and pay attention. Now here's the original terms, or the Sanskrit terms, Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna, which are traditionally translated as morality, meditation, and wisdom. But I like to think of them like this. And you want to keep your eyes open to see the suchness of the emptiness that surrounds us. Very mysterious sounding phrase, right? But it's not. Listen to a story. Buddhadharma is full of stories. They're always telling stories. And I like that. Right? So here's one story. One day, a man of the people said to Zen Master Ikkyu, "Master, will you please write for me some maxim of the highest wisdom?" So the master picked up his brush and wrote the word, or it would have been the character for attention. And Ikkyu says, "Well, what does that mean? Can't you write something more?" And Zen Master Ikkyu wrote, "Attention, attention." And the man was beginning to get upset, and he said, "I really don't see much depth or subtlety or wisdom in what you've written." Then Ikkyu wrote the same word 3 times running, "Attention, attention, attention." Angrily, the man demanded, "What does that word attention mean anyway?" And Ikkyu answered gently, "Attention means attention." That's more profound than it seems. and harder than it seems. Because, according to the Buddhadharma, what you really first see when you try to pay attention to yourself and your experience of the world around you, here and now, is that simply paying attention seems almost impossible. Because what we're really preoccupied with is not reality, but our conceptions of reality, expressed in the words, opinions, beliefs, and attitudes given to us by other people as we were growing up. The names that we talked about when we discussed Taoism that can name no lasting name, but we start out thinking that they can. And see how easily we move from group to group, trading one set of names for another in our desire to feel safe and secure. Unhappy with society's names, we might reject society and form our own names, our own little group. But then we might get dissatisfied with that group and move into another group and trade their names for someone else's names. But names can name no lasting names, not even the names that reject society's values. The rebel is as confused as the conservative in that sense. And obsessed with the names and the security they represent for our desires, we end up with this strange world that we call our ego or our self. But what we think is reality is usually just a perception of it. And just like in a dream, we mistake the fantasies of our desire for something really happening around us, whether in society with its fantasies or outside of society in some subgroup in its fantasies. Now, the one who woke up claimed to teach a way to cut through these fantasies, a way to come out of it, like waking up from a dream, and that to do that, all you needed was what is here and now in your life as a human being. No gods, no supernatural forces, no magic words or rituals, but simply the realization of your own life and mind through discipline, stillness, and attention to the reality that's right here with us, but which is obscured by this obsession we have for security and permanence. So the one who woke up claimed that you can become free from bondage to all forms of opinions, beliefs, and acts of the imagination, what some people call the real world, and be brought to a state of absolute emptiness, which is simultaneously the fullness of what is. Emptiness is the fullness of suchness, because when you become empty or void of the words and labels and concepts we paste over the world, you see for the first time this, right? This is the void, the emptiness, so hard to see because of the concepts we lay over it. Are you looking for heaven? Here it is, just like we are now. Okay? And it would seem even better if I could see your faces. But still, it's here. And somewhere you're listening to me. And how marvelous is that? Okay? And what is the way to achieve this? What incredible feats must you do? What astonishing searches? What awful sacrifices and penances? How do you start? How do you do this? Well, the one who woke up said, sit down where you are and pay attention to who you are and what's happening all around you. Sit down and know yourself and your experience of the world. You want to know what's real? Take a seat. What a joker. Only a philosopher would say that. And it's a trick. Philosophers are full of tricks because it turns out to be the most amazingly hard thing in the world. Just to sit down, be quiet, and pay attention to your own life and thought without judging, without letting your mind chatter away. Just sit there and let it all arise and watch it. To sit down and come and see who you are. And who are you, according to the Buddhadharma? Well, listen to a Buddhist teacher called Chogyam Trungpa, who points a finger at the moon for us. Listen. Listen to this finger pointed at the moon. Attention. 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 Fundamentally, there is this open space, the basic ground, what we really are. Our most fundamental state of mind before the creation of ego is such that there is basic openness, basic freedom, a spacious quality. And we have now, and have always had this openness. Take, for example, our everyday lives and thought patterns. When we see an object, in the first instant there's a sudden perception which has no logic or conceptualization to it at all. We just perceive the thing in the open ground. Then immediately we panic and begin to rush about trying to add something to it, either trying to find a name for it, or trying to categorize it, or trying to find pigeonholes in which we could locate and categorize it. Gradually, things develop from there. But the beginning point is that there is open space belonging to no one. There is always primordial intelligence connected with the space. Vijja, which means intelligence in Sanskrit. Precision, sharpness with space, sharpness with room in which to put things, exchange things. It is like a spacious hall where there is room to dance about, where there is no danger of knocking things over or tripping over things, for there is completely open space. We are this space. We are one with it, with vijja, intelligence, and openness. So this philosopher, for me, one of the best examples of what a philosopher is, Shakyamuni Buddha, claims that you can pay attention, and as a human being, through reason and discipline, discover the experience of reality in a truly pragmatic sense, that you can step beyond the words that are appearance, and that bewitch us into bland desires and mindless egotism, and discover the reality that rolls all around us, what Lao Tzu called the great ordinary, as best as I can coordinate their two fingers pointing at the moon. So let's talk about Gautama Siddhartha, born in the 6th century BCE, in the country of the Shakyas, in the foothills of the Himalayas, who's become simply known as the one who woke up. But first, any question, comments, or thoughts so far that you'll have to write down and ask me about when we Zoom together in this strange situation we find ourselves in the midst of a worldwide plague? Now, his father was king of the Shakyas, a kingdom in the foothill of the Himalayas, so he's called Shakyamuni Buddha, the awakened one of the Shakyas. And his family was of the clan Gautama, so he was also called Gautama Buddha. And his first name was simply Siddhartha. And he was raised a pampered prince. Okay? He was sort of kept from the more distressing aspects of life. To me, it seemed like he was sort of raised like a upper-class American, right? Never going into the bad parts of town. His parents would monitor what he watched on TV. And when he went shopping, he had to go to only the best stores, where they only hired the best people to wait on them. You know, someone with money market funds and just very well-off people. He was raised like that, without having to work, without having to get acquainted with the sort of seamier side of life. But he had a companion who I think, in all the stories of the Buddha, they don't make enough of this guy, because I think he was very important, as you'll see. And his name was Channa, or Chandaka, and he was sort of the prince's companion, sort of like his butler, I guess. His sort of his butler, his companion, who would do things for him and also drive his car. Actually drive his chariot. Yeah. And I'm sure you've heard the story, but it's fun to tell, and I'll tell it to you again. And if you hadn't heard it, you get to hear it for the first time, about when Sid and Channa went out on the town. Now, Siddhartha was apparently a really sharp kid. Everybody had always been telling his dad, the king, that he was probably going to turn into either a great religious leader, right, because that's pretty important in Hindu culture, or he'd turn into a great politician, right? And of course his dad wanted him to be a great politician and not a great religious leader, right? And the religion here we're talking about is essentially the Vedic religion that we studied in the Upanishads. So that's the context that Siddhartha grew up in, but he grew up isolated from anything to do with anything that would distract him from becoming, I guess, the best little prince his dad would ever want him to be. But as he grew older, he grew curious about what went on outside the little circle of life his dad kept him in. And he wanted to have an outing, and so his dad decided to organize outings for him. But what he did is he'd sort of say, you're going to go down this street, and he had it all cleaned up, and he had all the unpleasant people sort of rushed out of town, had all the buildings painted, sweep this, everything like that. Just like when any bigwig comes to town, they'll run the homeless out, make the homeless go away, and so on, and make it all look so much better than it really is. And so here's the first day, and Channa's driving the chariot, and out they go. And they go down the street, and suddenly Siddhartha says to Channa, let's go down that side street, Channa. And Channa said, yes, Lord. And boom, they took away from the main entourage, and they went down that street. And Siddhartha saw 4 things, or sometimes 6. I love the way in Buddhadharma, they're very open to different ways of saying things and seeing them. And traditionally, though, there's 4 sights. I'll tell you about 2 more that I really like, though. The first one he saw, they sort of take off down the side street where it hadn't been all cleaned up, and they see a really old guy, right? I mean, a really old guy. And he's sort of just creaking along down the street. And Siddhartha had never really seen a super old guy before because his dad had kept all these distressing sights away from him, right? Guess he never went to visit the relatives in the old folks' home. And he says, and this is where I think Channa becomes important, right? Siddhartha says, what's that, Channa? What happened to him? And Channa says, that's old age, Lord. And Siddhartha's a little shook up, and he says, can that happen to anybody? And Channa says, yes, Lord, even to princes and kings. And the next day, they go out again, and they take off down another side street, and what do they see but a sick person? I mean, a really sick person. And Siddhartha wonders, now what's that, Channa? Because his dad had kept him away from people who got really sick in a very bad way. And Channa said, well, that's sickness, Lord. That's disease and sickness. And Siddhartha asked, could that happen to me? And Channa said, well, yes, Lord. Sickness happens to everyone, even princes and kings. Channa. Well, the next day they go out again, and they take off down another side street, and what do they run into but a dead person being carried to their funeral? And Sid's dad had never let him go to a funeral, or I guess when somebody died, they just sort of didn't talk about it, like, the way people do, right? And he saw that dead person, and he said, now what's that, Channa? What the hell's going on here? And Channa said, that's death, Lord. It comes to all men, even princes and kings. Ah, Channa. You can see why I think Channa is pretty important. And they go out another day, the famous 4th sight. They take off down a side street, and they see a sage. They see, remember the Sanyasin? The guys who went off into the forest to Upanishad and looked for Brahman? They saw one of those guys trucking down the street. And he said, well, what's that, Channa? And he said, well, that's someone who's given up everything to look for truth, Lord. And Siddhartha asked, well, can anybody do that, Channa? And Channa said, yes, Lord, even princes and kings. Now, those are the famous 4 sights that shook up Siddhartha, put him into the gap, as I call it, where words that you've been taught no longer fit, and you become filled with questions, and you want answers. But sometimes there are 2 other sights that it said Siddhartha experienced before he left. And the story is, the dad saw how shook up his son had become, so he thought he'd send him for a nice day out in the countryside. So he sent him out to a farming village. But that didn't quite work out like the dad planned, because there he saw workers sweating and striving under the sun without enough to eat, oxen goaded with iron tips, worms and insects destroyed by the plow, gnats and stinging flies. And I guess he sort of asked China, "What the hell's this, China?" China said, "Well, this is work for most people, Lord." "Well, could that happen to me, China?" "Well, depending on how it goes, Lord. Some days you're a king, another day you might be a worker in the field. Right? Even princes and kings can be deposed." And he goes back, and the story is, his dad said, "One last try, I gotta cheer him up." So he threw him a big party, a big wild party, and with lots of dancing girls and food and music. And the story is, the next day when he woke up, he looked around and everybody was sleeping. You know how it is after one of those wild parties? People are laying around, that sort of drool coming out of their mouths, and they're all sort of just looking like, what the hell, right? And limbs askew. And it's like he says, is this all there is to life, right? I could get old. I could get sick. I could die. I could end up on some damn farm. I can have parties, but I'm going to die, right? Well, what about that guy I saw who's looking for truth, right? What about him? So the story is, he goes out to the stable. He gets China to get the horses ready. They go to the edge of the kingdom, and he sees a beggar there, yet wearing these old robes. And so he exchanges his princely robes for the beggar's robes. And in essence, when you see Buddhist monks wearing robes, that's the idea. They're wearing beggar's robes. But I guess the equivalent today would be Siddhartha goes out in a cool set of threads, and he exchanges it with a beggar's blue jeans and t-shirt. It's essentially what it amounts to. When you see the monks walking in the robes, it's like they're dressed like homeless people. They're supposed to be. That's the symbol of it, right? He takes out his sword and cuts off his long princely hair, because to have long hair was a sign you were a noble. And then he set out. Okay? And he spent 6 years following essentially the way we talked about in the Upanishads. He went to Upanishad, sit down near a seer. But in his time, the practices of austerity and asceticism had become very extreme. People would essentially starve themselves and drink as little water and food as possible. So you'll see these pictures of Siddhartha all just sort of wasted away, with the bones in his chest showing, as he just practices as hard as he can to find a solution to the suffering he'd seen, because that's what had bothered him, right? This suffering that everyone went through, that there was no explanation for, that all the words and everything he'd learned growing up couldn't help him understand old age, sickness, and death, and how parties ain't gonna help. and we all might end up working on a farm, right? and not a very good farm either. All right. Okay. And so he becomes so famous at his practice of meditation in his attempt to find Brahman, essentially, right, in the way of his culture that we studied about. And he tried so hard to dull his desires. He grew so skinny and wasted away with long hair, and you wouldn't bathe, and you'd just sit there and meditate and meditate and meditate. And he was so good at it that 5 followers came. One day he's sitting there with his 5 followers who were so amazed at how hard he practiced all this. And a thought came to him. The thought was, this isn't working. It's not working at all. And so near death from starvation, he gets up and goes down the mountain, which really bothers his followers, that he's given up. He goes into the village that's down the mountain, and a girl sees him and feels sorry for him, and she gives him rice and milk with honey, and he slowly begins to eat it, and he sits under a tree, a pipal tree, and there, it's said, he sits and decides, I'm not going to leave until I figure this out. And as he sat under that tree, he realized enlightenment. He woke up. Now, I think the crucial moment was when he came down off that mountain. And there's a nice poem by the poet Allen Ginsberg that sort of sums that up for me. Now, this is a famous painting, which today is found in the Tokyo Museum, and it's from, I think, around the 12th century, right? Though I'm not sure, I'd have to look it up, but it's called Shakyamuni coming out from the mountain, and there he is, coming down. He's realized what he's been doing is not going to work, and Allen Ginsberg saw this painting in a museum, and he wrote a poem, and, well, let's just read it. It sort of resonates with me. He drags his bare feet out of a cave under a tree, eyebrows grown long with weeping and hook-nosed woe, and ragged, soft robes wearing a fine beard, unhappy hands clasped to his naked breast. Humility is beatness. Humility is beatness, faltering into the bushes by a stream, all things inanimate but his intelligence, stands upright there, though trembling. Arhat, who sought heaven under a mountain of stone, sat thinking till he realized the land of blessedness exists in the imagination. The flash come, empty mirror. How painful to be born again, wearing a fine beard, re-entering the world, a bitter wreck of a sage. Earth before him, his only path. We can see his soul, he knows nothing, like a god. Shaken, meek wretch. Humility is beatness before the absolute world. But Siddhartha had saw it was a way to find what is most real and how to live it in the light of it, the appropriate or just way to live, given how life is. And the way he found seems to me to be what I would call radically existential and radically pragmatic in its approach to reality and life. Now, by existential, I refer to something out of my training as a Western philosopher. Existentialism. Existentialism is a type of philosophy that thinks that theory cuts us off from life, that truth is not to be found through theoretical speculation, but through interrogating actual lived experience and how people live things out in their everyday normal lives. What do we normally experience as human beings, and how can we understand our actual lived experience such that we can come to terms with it, right? And the Buddhadharma seems to me to be radically existential because, first of all, the Buddha only claimed to be a human being and to have achieved what a human being can, unaided, through human effort and intelligence. What is most real and how to live it out depends on human intelligence and effort. And radically existential in a second sense, because it involves a life of truth, involving how you, the individual, live. No one is responsible for you but you, and theory is totally unimportant except as it informs a life of truth. The Buddha over and over again told his followers to take responsibility for themselves, to test what he was saying, and see how it worked out for them in terms of their own life. Consider what Rahula writes in What the Buddha Taught, where he recounts a famous story about the Buddha and how he thought about these things. This is on page 12 in your book. Rahula writes, "The Buddha was not interested in discussing unnecessary metaphysical questions, which are purely speculative, and which create imaginary problems. It seems that there were some among his own disciples who did not appreciate this attitude of his. For we have the example of one of them, Malankya-Putta by name, who put to the Buddha 10 well-known classical questions on metaphysical problems and demanded answers. One day, Malankaputta got up from his afternoon meditation, went to the Buddha, saluted him, sat on one side, and said, "Sir, when I was all alone meditating, this thought occurred to me. There are these problems unexplained, put aside and rejected by the Blessed One, namely, is the universe eternal or not, finite or infinite? Is the soul the same as the body, or is the soul one thing and the body another? Does the realized Buddha exist after death or not, or both exist or not exist? These problems the Blessed One does not explain to me. This attitude does not please me." Malankaputta, the frustrated metaphysician. He seems to me almost to be a grad student in philosophy. When I was in grad school, some of these questions I had to learn the various answers to. Is the universe eternal or not? Created or uncreated? Finite or infinite? Is the soul the same as the body? Why the mind-body problem? Malankaputta would have fit right in grad school in philosophy. And the Buddha answered Malankaputta, and he said, "If anyone says I will not lead the holy life under the Blessed One until he explains these questions, he may die with these questions unanswered by the realized one. Suppose a man is wounded by a poisoned arrow, and his friends and relatives bring him to a surgeon. Suppose the man should then say, 'I will not let this arrow be taken out until I know who shot me, whether he's a warrior, a priest, a businessman, or a servant, what his name and family might be, whether he's tall, short, or of medium stature, from what village, town, or city he comes from, until I know the type of bow, the type of arrow, and with what kind of material the point of arrow was made.' Malankaputta, that man would die without knowing any of these things. Even so, if anyone says, 'I will not follow the Buddha until he answers questions like these,' and so on, he would die with these questions unanswered by the realized one. Why have I not explained these things? Look, I so want them explained, I typed it in wrong. Why have I not explained these things? Because it is not useful. It's not going to help you realize nirvana. It's not going to help you be free from suffering. And I'm also here to tell you that grad school in philosophy didn't free me from suffering either. Now, this also makes the philosophy of the one who woke up radically pragmatic, which is another part of my Western philosophical training. There's a movement called pragmatism, which was founded by Charles Sanders Peirce, and behind it is an idea of what truth is. And Peirce said this: "Consider what effects, which might conceivably have practical bearings, we conceive the object of our conception to have. Then the whole of our conception of those effects is the whole of our conception of the objects." In other words, the truth is how things work out in action, in reality. The truth of a word or concept is found in its actual effect in the world, and is nothing beyond that. So the meaning of the concept hardness, for example, is that it cannot be easily scratched. And the truth of hardness is found in that, and not in some theory of atomic structure. Similarly, what about the truth of the meaning of the words believe in God? When I was a child, it seemed to me to be believing in God meant this: you get up on Sunday, you dress up, you go to a place where people said a lot of things I didn't understand. You would experience excruciating boredom, go home, eat my grandma's pot roast, get out of those damn clothes, and get on with my life. And that's what believing in God meant to me. Or another example, a pragmatist looking at two people leading lives, and both of these people are kind, they help people, they do their work when needed, they take care of their families, and one's an atheist and one's a Christian. To the pragmatist, the truth of their life is how they live, and not what they call themselves or what theories they have about life. So in another famous story, the Buddha told about a raft. Right? One of my favorite stories. "Oh, bhikkhus, oh, you monks, oh, you beggars, actually, oh, you beggars, a man is on a journey. He comes to a vast stretch of water. On this side, the shore is dangerous. but on the other side it is safe and without danger. No boat goes to the other shore, which is safe and without danger, nor is there any bridge for crossing over. So that man makes a raft, and with the help of the raft crosses over safely to the other side. Having crossed over, he thinks, this raft was of great help to me. It would be good to carry this raft on my head or on my back wherever I go. The Buddhists seem to love these fantastic images, like the man shot with the poisoned arrow who won't let them help him until he knows who shot the arrow and where it came from. And here again, you got this image of a guy who puts the raft up on his head like some big monstrous hat. And he goes walking around with it, staggering everywhere, because the raft helped him to get across the river. What do you think, O Bhikkhus, if he acted in this way? Would the man be acting properly in regard to the raft? Wouldn't he be acting properly if he thought, this raft was of great help to me. It would be good if I beached this raft on the shore or moored it and left it afloat and then went on my way. In the same manner, I've taught a truth similar to a raft. It is for crossing over and not for carrying. I mean, what an amazing statement. He says, follow my teachings, and when they've helped you achieve what you need to achieve, then just drop it. Don't worry about it. You don't believe in what I say. Don't believe in it, right? Use it to achieve something. The Buddha wanted his followers to come and see, not come and believe. The story of the raft points out that what was essential for him is that someone experience the truth of his words and that nothing be taken on faith. What is essential is experiencing a thing so as to understand it. This gives the way of the one who woke up an experimental, pragmatic flavor. You're asked to ehipasika, right? To come and see, not come and believe. Suppose I told you I have a gold coin inside my clenched fist, right? Now, with my fist clenched like this, you just have to take my word for it. You'd have to believe me on my own authority. Well, Getz says he has a coin in his fist, so I'll believe him, right? But that's not the Buddha's way. The Buddha had the way of the open palm. Now you don't have to believe me. You can see for yourself. I had a coin in my hand. Ehipasika. Come and see, not come and believe. With my fist opened up, and you able to see the coin, the question of belief on my authority never comes up. So the Buddha always talked about knowledge of his teachings gained through experience, and never about believing through faith in the sense of just taking somebody's word for it. So another story is told. Like I told you, the Buddhadharma is full of stories about the Buddha visiting a small town and they said, look, there's always some religious teacher or philosophy professor or somebody blowing into town, giving their views, claiming they've got the truth about life. They'd say all the others who came before him were wrong, and then they'd leave, and then another one would come in and say something different. And you know how it is. I think they had cable TV. Right, you're clicking at night, and you'll see these guys offering you, for $49.95, I'll teach you how to win friends and influence people. And you flip the channel, I'll tell you the meaning of life. And all these guys getting rich off a click, giving you their different views, and you don't know who the hell to believe. So the Buddha tells them, yes, it's proper that you have doubt. Look at that. He says it's a good thing to doubt, that you have perplexity, because a doubt has arisen in a matter which is doubtful. So look, he says, don't be led by reports or tradition or hearsay. Don't be led by the authority of religious texts, nor by mere logic and inference. I think he's thinking of the transrational there. Nor by considering appearances, nor by the delight of speculative opinions, nor by seeming possibilities. Oh, let me jump up on the board. I didn't write that out right. Nor by the idea, this is our teacher, right? My teacher said it, so I should just believe it. Don't do that, he said. But when you know for yourselves that certain things are unwholesome and wrong and bad, then give them up. And when you know for yourselves that certain things are wholesome and good, then accept them and follow them. And the Buddha went so far as to repeatedly tell his followers to examine the Buddha himself, to try out what he said, to argue with him, to go practice what he said and see if it worked. See for themselves if what he was saying was true, if it truly resonated with their actual experiences of the world. And he told them if it doesn't, then don't pay me any attention at all. So what did the Buddha say was true that he asked others to verify for themselves? Well, that's quite a story, and all I can do here is hint at it, but we can make a little start. Come and see. Now, the Buddha thought that when you begin to really pay attention to what is most real, to discipline yourself with stillness and attention, the first thing you realize is the truth of impermanence, that nothing is permanent and unchanging, and that the source of all our confusion is to try to make the impermanent to be permanent, which can only lead to unsatisfactoriness. Nothing is permanent, not even and especially your body, which the Tibetans have a nice word for, le, which means something you leave behind. And you're always leaving your body behind. More and more, it comes, the older you get, the more it seems to be not yours at all, as it grows and matures and declines and changes, and you can't really do anything about it. Now, I always think about this truth when I'm puking, you know, and you're hanging over the toilet, and you're just puking your guts out, right? My body's changing, and I can't do nothing about it. My body's impermanent. Or think about what we call ourselves. From conception in your mother's womb, 1, 2, 3, 4 to 9 months in the womb, then you're born. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 18. How old are you? 19, 20, 21? I'm all the way up to 64. Which one is yourself? Which one is really you? Can you find something permanent there anywhere? And this is not presented as a theory, or rather it's presented as an observation that you should test out for yourself. Not a religious dogma, not something to believe, something real, how it is, right? Come and see. As you look around in the world, can you find something permanent, right? And certainly not something like the Atman, right? The Buddha right from the start thinks there's no such thing. No Brahman, no Atman, no permanence anywhere. Right? And he said that if you thought, really thought in a disciplined way about your actual experience of life, you can see that there are 3 marks or characteristics of what is real. 3 basic features of existence. Impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self, or insubstantiality. This means that everything undergoes change and has no permanent substance. And from the point of view of desiring permanence and substance, this is dukkha. This is unsatisfactory. That from the point of view of ego, existence is pervaded by a kind of frustrating confusion, a sense of irritating incompleteness, as we try to stop the change and make what is impermanent substantial. Right? And even the moments of happiness and joy that are real too never last. Every joy is impermanent and has no substance. And to try to hold on to the happiness or joy and make it permanent would simply make things more unsatisfactory. The Buddha was called the knower of the world, the knower, and said we can only begin to know how to live when we realize the reality of these truths, not in theory, but in a radical confrontation with the experience of your life as you live it, resulting in insight wisdom. And the Buddha taught that impermanence, insubstantiality, And the unsatisfactoriness of trying to ignore the truth of these marks becomes really clear in the face of death. The thought of death focuses the mind on these realities and makes life become clear. So paradoxically, in Buddhadharma philosophy, it's the thought of death that teaches you how to live. And this doesn't mean that you become morbid or try to kill yourself, right? Like that was the Buddha's first mistake. He thought he would starve himself to near death to try to find the truth, and instead he realized that wasn't the way, right? That would be a strange confusion, because to think about death is to think about life and how you should live, right? Socrates taught something similar. Socrates said to philosophize, those who philosophize correctly practice dying like a craft. Now, we're all dying. I hope this is not news to you. I'm going to break it to you now that we're all dying. To be born is to know you're going to die. So to think about dying is to think about how you're going to live, right? To practice dying like a craft means to practice living like a craft with an awareness of how impossibly precious each moment is, because it's not going to last. Because the idea is, the longer you live in the face of death, the more you're set free to live fully. That physical death will come soon enough all on its own, who knows when. And until then, we need to pay attention to this wonder that is around us, right? Keeping in mind what the Buddha said. This existence of ours is as transient as autumn clouds. To watch the birth and death of beings is like looking at the movements of a dance. And we're in the dance. We're two-stepping too. A lifetime is like a flash of lightning in the sky, rushing by like a torrent down a deep mountain. So what do you do then? You pay attention. 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 Thank you for listening to me today. Thank you for your kind attention.